Hello and welcome to another episode of Unlapped. We're talking to you after the Singapore Grand Prix. Lots to get stuck into this weekend. A championship that has been won and a championship now that we're all turning our attention to. I'm Nate Saunders, Laurence Edmondson joining me. As I always say, you'll have noticed that I'm neither Katie George nor Nicole Briscoe. It's the two of us again this weekend. Before we get started, Unlapped is presented by Oracle, and right now Oracle is offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move over to OCI. Please see if your company qualifies at oracle.com/unlapped. Now remember, if you're watching on YouTube for this video, please leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe to our new ESPN F1 channel for all things F1 all season long. And if you're listening, and of course, if you like us enough to do so, please hit us with a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. Lawrence, hello. It feels like just a minute ago that we were together in Singapore. How are you getting on?
Yeah, I mean, the flight didn't feel like a minute. It's a long old flight when you go from Singapore.
Yeah, it's one of the toughest ones of the year, isn't it? It's rough.
It's got to be up there. But yeah, I think it was an interesting weekend. I mean, Singapore, I think, always has some extra stuff going on around it. A lot of VIPs and big wigs from the teams turn up, and so there's always a little bit of extra stuff going on. And of course, the title fight, which I guess is what we're going to focus on today.
Absolutely. Well, we'll start right there because, as I mentioned in the intro, one championship was done. Maybe the championship that the teams care a lot about, but I think it's fair to say that for most fans, it's not the one that we get stuck into the most, but it's the Constructors' Championship. McLaren wrapping that up in incredible time. 6 races still to go. It's obviously been a formality for a while, but obviously in doing so, they did it at the Singapore Grand Prix under a bit of a cloud, I would say. I think that's a fair way to put it. You know, so much this season has been focused on that Lando Norris, Oscar Piastri fight. A few questions here to just jump straight in with, but Lawrence, the obvious question for you is, now that McLaren have wrapped up this Constructors' Championship, we've seen them kind of walk this line all season between fairness and what is fair, what isn't fair. How do you even judge those two things? In the Drivers' Championship between their two drivers, there's 22 points now between Piastri and Norris. It was a controversial beginning to that race with Norris kind of barging Piastri as Piastri felt towards the wall. The question, as is written here, I think is the best way to get into this topic is, will Oscar and Lando now be able to race more aggressively now the Constructors is wrapped up? Are the gloves now off at McLaren, or do you think we'll see this policy of theirs continue further into the season?
Yeah, I don't think anything changes because, as you alluded to, we've known for some time that McLaren's going to win the Constructors' Championship. So the fact that it's mathematically impossible now for anyone to catch them, I don't think makes any difference. You know, McLaren still have this policy, whether you believe in it or not, that the two drivers are free to race. They get equal opportunities to race, but there are some lines in the sand, and one of those is you don't make contact. And that's why what happened in Singapore was so controversial, because for the first time since the Canadian Grand Prix, when Lando Norris went into the rear of Oscar Piastri but took full responsibility for that, for the first time since then, the two cars collided, and this one wasn't as clean cut, at all. And this was always going to happen. McLaren have said this from the start of the season, and I think we've all known this from the start of the season, that if these two drivers are fighting for a championship throughout a season in the same car, sharing the same racetrack, at some point they're going to make contact. And so it happened. Now, this kind of goes to show why you can't really have rules to cover every scenario in Formula One. We've seen that with stewarding for many years and the issues that creates, but within teams as well, it creates issues. I mean, the contact itself, no one would bat an eyelid if it was between two drivers from different teams. Just wouldn't be an issue. The FIA noted it, didn't even bother investigating it, because that's the kind of thing that happens on the opening lap of a Grand Prix. If you look further back down the grid, there was contact as well between drivers. So that's not really the issue here. The issue here is that McLaren has said since the start of the year, you guys race, but the one thing you do is you don't make contact. Now, the way they viewed it at the end of it, to kind of cut to the point of why McLaren didn't take any action as a result of Norris going into Piastri, is that Norris clipped Verstappen first, then his car got sideways, and then he went into Piastri. And they kind of viewed it as, well, it was a consequence of another racing incident that then led to that. It's not like he was trying to, take out Piastri on the way through, and therefore they've let it go. They have said they will review it, and I think it's going to be fascinating again when we all reconvene in Austin, Texas, and we can talk to drivers about it, because as they review it, maybe they'll look at it a slightly different way. I think, even after the race, Piastri, he said he hadn't seen it on video, therefore he needed to see it. I'll be fascinated to see what he thinks after he watches that, because I don't know about you, but if Norris is going to make that move, and I'm glad he did, because I think we need to see Norris being aggressive, if he's going to win this championship. But if you make that move, you are kind of responsible for what happens after, even if it's a result of hitting another car. But of course, it was Norris that went into the back of Verstappen. So it's so nuanced. There's so many things going on, and McLaren's rules, as developed and as talked about as they have been within the team going into each race, can't cover everything. And this was a perfect example. And so they let them continue to race. But here's a question back to you, Nate. You're on the pit wall at McLaren. What do you do when Oscar Piastri says, hey, Norris just drove into me? Are we going to allow that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I've been thinking about that a little bit. And you hit the nail on the head there of how they've tried to manage this. And I actually think that you probably do what McLaren did in the long run. I'm not sure if you agree with that, but one of the problems McLaren has here is, how do you judge what is fair and what isn't fair? We all know what we think is fair, but the perspective of fairness is largely dictated by your viewpoint coming into that. And Piastri and Norris will both have a very different view of that. The pit wall as well can see all of that stuff. To your point, Piastri had only seen it from inside the car once in real time. Norris had only seen it in the car once in real time. They've been reacting to stuff as it happened. The McLaren pit wall had this opportunity to kind of step back and say, well, here's what happened. Here's the replay. Here's why Norris went in there. I think they made the right call. You made the right point there. I think that if this was between two non-teammates who were fighting for the championship, we probably talk about how good a move it was and how close it was and how risky the fight was. And I think that because of the framework McLaren has set, you have to kind of let them race. But this is the problem they now have, isn't it, from the pit wall? And that question entirely is, they have created this framework between the two drivers where we expect that now every kind of little slight or moment between the teams has to it's almost like they're getting validation or feedback. They're like, well, this just happened. What do we do now? And if you're Piastri now, this whole idea of what does the pit wall do? Can they fight with the gloves off? I agree with you. I think that everything continues, because if you're Piastri, you'd say, well, hang on. I gave up 3 points in Monza to Lando by playing the team game, by being the good soldier. We were there on Thursday when Lewis said, he was asked, wasn't he, in the press conference, what advice would you give to Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris? And all he said was, don't give up a position. That was his advice. It was clear, what that was aimed at. And then if you're Piastri, you look at this now and you're like, well, I probably lost another couple of points. It was 3 again, wasn't it? To Norris barging past like this, and me asking the team, well, is that okay? Because, you guys told me in Austria and you told me again in Hungary when I nearly went into the back of Lando, rein it in. That's right on the line there. So if you're Oscar right now, I actually think that you don't want the team to turn around so you guys can race freely, because you'd say, well, hang on, I'm 6 points down in the win-loss column on that. So McLaren have created this bizarre spectacle and this kind of a bit of an albatross, if I'm honest with you, in terms of, I actually do agree with another thing Piastri said on Sunday evening was he does think it comes from a fair place, a genuine, sincere place. And I think we've had enough conversations between us, haven't we, with McLaren. They are trying to make this as fair as possible, but with every single one that they do, I think it becomes less fair, because fairness is just a subjective thing between two drivers. So in terms of that first question that you threw back to me, I would have done the same thing, but I don't know how McLaren carries on with it now, because the benefit for one of their drivers now ignoring the team or disagreeing with the team in these moments is far higher, right? Because there's no Constructors' Championship to win or lose. To your point, I don't think it's really had a big impact either. But if you're Lando Norris now, you're Oscar Piastri, and you're told in the next race you've got to let the other guy through, you're like, well, hang on a second, we're now in the run-in to the title fight. So that's the more interesting one to me, is that McLaren, I think, are still going to make these calls. Are the drivers actually going to be adhering to those calls now? They've got next year's to stay with the team. They're both under contract through 27 as well. So that is in the back of both of their minds as well, of you don't want to burn this bridge now and it affect your time at the team. So many fascinating dynamics. And I'm actually kind of glad that now the focus is all just on the two drivers. How does McLaren keep racing? And we know after Monza, don't we, they had those very robust conversations about how all of that went down. Piastri does seem to come out of those with a very good nuanced understanding of kind of how to explain his viewpoint going forward. So I think he'll largely be the same Piastri we've seen. But yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't like to be on the pit wall going forward, because I think they're going to have at least one more of those moments, just given how close they've been. A lot of people suggesting, Lawrence, that after the race, Piastri was apoplectic with the team. I think we have to address some of this because, it obviously was a very controversial race. There was a moment, and I wrote about this on ESPN on Sunday, on .com, about Piastri not being on the kind of the very weirdly impromptu podium ceremony that F1 and McLaren did together. "We are the champions," blaring out. Kind of a cool moment. I mean, I'd not seen that before. It's the first time they'd done that. Piastri was the only person of note that wasn't there. You had Zach Brown, you had Andrea Stelli, you had Lando Norris, who had obviously still been on the podium from celebrating as one of the top 3 finishers of the race. A lot of people reading into that. A lot of people reading into the fact that there's a moment where Piastri disconnected his radio as Zach Brown is in the middle of saying, "Congratulations, Oscar, great," and then it goes dead. And I don't know the full story behind that. But do you think that there's anything to this, or do you think this was kind of bad timing, poor optics? Because Oscar did celebrate with the team as normal later in the pit lane, about an hour later, when all the media obligations were done. It did seem like a lot of that was overblown on social media, right?
Yeah, Piastri would have been much happier to be on the podium than talking to us in the media pen, I think. I mean, there's no doubt about that. I mean, that smacks me as terrible organisation by whoever was responsible for putting that podium celebration together. And I think it kind of largely came from F1, didn't it? They wanted to do it for McLaren. But if you're doing that, let the drivers know before the race. It was pretty much a foregone conclusion that they were going to be up there. Let the drivers know before the race and make sure that there's somebody there to direct Oscar towards the podium, whether that's from the team or from F1, but probably from F1 if it's something that they've stuck together. So I think that was the failing there. And, as far as I know, and from, I think, Oscar's surprise at all of a sudden turning around the TV pen and seeing that on the screen, he didn't intentionally not go to it. I don't think that's the case at all. And
no, it seemed like it was quite unfortunate timing, with the regs as they are. But yeah, I think that must have been quite a surprising moment for him in the moment of like, oh, they're celebrating. You were down there, right? And you saw him kind of see that.
Yeah, I mean, those regulations they get sent out like pretty much the post-race procedure to all the teams on the Sunday ahead of each race. And sometimes they're slightly different because each track layout is slightly different. So just the general process of how you kind of, leave the cars, make sure the drivers get weighed, then go to the media stuff. That's all set out actually in a document. Surely you have some kind of, just put an extra line in there, or just make McLaren at the very least aware that there's a slight variation of that, and make sure there's somebody there to sort of handle it. Because otherwise you do get this kind of, this story building up. It's not great for McLaren. I bet they were pretty upset to find out that Piastri had been directed to the TV pen and not to the podium. But I think it purely comes from misunderstanding. And if there's any doubts about that, there are plenty of photos afterwards. I think it was about 2 or 3 hours afterwards, once all the media commitments are out the way, and Piastri was right in the celebrations outside the McLaren garage. And there's photographs, and it actually happened directly under the media centre, so I can say for certain that both drivers attended that. And so, I think it's a bit of a non-story. It's just a shame that it couldn't come together because I think it's a nice idea allowing them on the podium to celebrate something as significant as a Constructors' Championship. But it's just a bit of a shame that they couldn't all do it together. But,
and it makes it mean more as well, doesn't it, when you see that moment? Because I think one of the criticisms, we always have a joke here on ESPN.com that whenever a driver wins a championship, I will roll out the same article that I've written about 10 years running, which is where is the driver's championship? Why don't we see the driver who wins the championship loft the trophy, hold the trophy aloft? And it's because the FIA gala at the end of the year is where the driver's champion and then the constructors' champion officially get their championship. So McLaren still didn't get the Constructors' Championship in Singapore unless I missed it, but they did get the moment to celebrate. And I think if you make that a big moment, I think the Constructors' Championship can kind of grow a little bit in stature, because I think it is, especially among newer fans as well, and this isn't a dig at newer fans at all, but it's never seemed as important as the drivers is the be-all and end-all. And you talk to those team members, a lot of them will tell you that as long as the team wins the constructors, a lot of their bonuses are based on that as well. That's huge for them, so I think making it a bigger spectacle and making it mean more, beyond just, that team just won the constructors, I think is a nice thing. But you're absolutely right. I think not having the flexibility either from F1's side or McLaren's side to let Piastri up there was strange. And McLaren were pretty upset with how it looked from a PR perspective. I think they realized immediately what it looked like. And yeah, nobody. It's a classic thing, isn't it? Is that as much as they did have that celebration in the paddock afterwards, no one saw that. Everyone on TV saw the podium celebration. So, pretty bad one. Just a quick one, because we're just going to look at the stat of the week in a second, which is obviously based on McLaren. The quick one for you, and I can also answer this. We have kind of looked at Oscar as being this kind of stone cold killer all season. We've had Baku where he had he had an instance in both qualifying and the race. And then maybe a Singapore where I'm not saying the pressure got to him a bit, but he sounded quite fraught on the radio. Are we seeing the first evidence of Piastri being under a bit of pressure as the guy in front? Because when you've got that target on your back and the finish line's getting closer, I think that's when that furnace goes up, doesn't it, in terms of the pressure you're feeling out in front?
Yeah, I think there's definitely significantly more pressure on Piastri now. I still think he's dealing with it relatively well. I mean, if you can look at both McLaren drivers and point out mistakes through Singapore, and then you go back a weekend and you can point out even more in Baku, especially on Piastri's side. But if you look at qualifying, for example, it was Lando Norris who made the mistake, touched the wall at turn 17, lost 10th of a second. That was enough to put him behind the grid 2 places, well, in 5th to Oscar Piastri's 3rd on the grid, which was, the reason why he had to be so aggressive in turn 1. So I think you can look at both of those drivers and see that the pressure in different ways is starting to pile up. And I think more than anything else, they've gone to a bunch of circuits where their rivals have been very competitive. So we've gone from a series of circuits, in the lead up to the summer break and Zandvoort afterwards, where the McLaren was the class of the field, car was really suited to the track, so it was a battle just between the two of them. Now it's getting messy because all of a sudden Max Verstappen's Red Bull is performing on certain types of circuits, he's happy with the balance of it, and all of a sudden he's a potential long shot. I still think it's very much a long shot, even though he beat both McLarens in Singapore for the title. And then George Russell, out of nowhere, puts the car on pole position, wins the race quite comfortably. So I think it's a combination of the pressure going up, but also McLaren's advantage on certain circuits starting to leak away a little bit. And that will be a really interesting to see how those drivers can manage that, because it's so different when all of a sudden in Q3, you're not really sure if the car's going to make the front row. It's not a guarantee, or, you could be one mistake and you could be 6th or 7th on the grid. And, we've seen that over the last 2 races. So I think that's what's coming together. But, I think both of them have the ability to kind of close out this championship in the right way, get good results. Whether Norris can overhaul Piastri, I'm still doubtful of. I still think Piastri's a favourite. But with Oscar, I genuinely think if you listen as well to even his most fraught radio message during that race in Singapore, there was still a logic working behind the scenes there. It wasn't like he'd just completely lost it. It was probably the angriest we've heard him on the radio, but there was still, kind of that cold calculating kind of mind working behind the scenes there. So I don't think we're yet at a stage where we can say Piastri is going to throw this away and it's all falling apart, because apart from Baku, it's not.
Yeah. No, and the reason I ask, I'll give my answer as well, but I'll do it after the stat of the week just to give myself a bit more support on what I'm saying. The stat of the week is brought to you by Oracle. Right now, Oracle is offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to OCI. See if your company qualifies at oracle.com/unlapped. And the stat of the week this week is actually quite a big one. It's quite an interesting one. It's looking back at the teammate battles for the championship, where the driver at the halfway point in the season, which in this case this year was obviously Oscar Piastri, he's led for most of the year. These are instances where a teammate has lost the championship to their teammate at the end of that season. And there'll be a lot of familiar names in here, and there's 2 that are exactly the same. 2016, Lewis Hamilton was leading midway through the season. He lost it to Nico Rosberg. The opposite happened in 2014. Nico Rosberg was leading, lost it to Lewis Hamilton. 88, Prost was leading at the midway stage, lost to Senna. 84, Prost again, obviously unlucky at the halfway point. He lost it to Niki Lauda. 1960, Bruce McLaren, a name that is obviously relevant for this podcast. He was leading at halfway, lost it to Jack Brabham. And 1956, Peter Collins was leading at halfway, and he lost it to Juan Manuel Fangio by the end of that season. So it has happened before, with teammates in that way. I happen to agree with you. I think Piastri is still by far the favourite. I mean, when we've been talking about this 60-something point gap that Verstappen has, 22 points is still an enormous lead at this point, especially if as we've seen, and you've just alluded to there, the points on offer now for McLaren aren't 7 for finishing first versus second. I think it's going to be a lot smaller in terms of what they're able to do. So I think that's quite an interesting one. My money would still be on Piastri, but I think the problem for him now with 22 points is you're now in that kind of that Goldilocks zone almost of one retirement, and suddenly the other guy is ahead of you or is so much closer to you. So he's lost that buffer that he's had since Zandvoort, which I think is interesting. Let's look at Singapore quickly. Now, we do podium predictions every weekend. I think slightly brag this week. It's a pretty loose brag, I've got to be honest. I'm still far behind you guys. Lawrence, I've got to shame you from the beginning. Your podium was Lewis in third place, Lando in second, and Oscar in first. You thought we'd have an Oscar Piastri win. None of those came off, I'm afraid, my friends, so 0 points there. I got Lando Norris in third place correct, but I had Oscar Piastri in front of him and Max Verstappen winning. I was all in on the Max Verstappen Red Bull hype train, so I only get 1 point there. Nicole, who obviously is not with us today, she said Charles Leclerc in third. Interesting that you and Nicole both went for a Ferrari on the podium. I think a lot of people thought that. That wasn't correct. Max Verstappen in second. That was right. She also, like me, said Oscar Piastri in first, so she got a point. Sadly, still no trifectas this season. I'm saving mine till the end of the season. I'm still the roll call of shame. Nate, I'll start with me because we do those in reverse order. Nate, 9 points in third, pretty pathetic. Lawrence, 14 points. That's not bad at all. You had a scoreless weekend, but you're still solidly there. And Nicole blazing a trail out in front on 17. So we really have some work to do. And yeah, I think that those predictions have to get a lot better all round, just because there's been a few weeks now where they haven't come off very well. One name that we all failed to say, Lawrence, and I'm quite surprised actually in hindsight obviously is 2020, is one Mr. George Russell, who was absolutely dominant from the beginning of qualifying through to the race. He was almost untouchable. Remarkably, still a man without a contract next season. He said after the race he thinks he's ready to win a world championship, that he's the most complete he's felt in terms of driving talent. You know Russell very well. You've covered a lot of his career to this point. Was this one of his most impressive wins? He's obviously got a handful of them now. This really stood out to me in terms of just how he did it, and the fact that the narrative coming into the race was this is all about Max Verstappen blowing McLaren out of the water, becoming the de facto championship contender. And actually, George Russell kind of watered that down a little bit, I think, didn't he? Because he was so good, and from turn one, as soon as he got in there ahead of Max, he just kind of disappeared and controlled the race.
I think it was proof that Formula One is far more complex than, I think a lot of us kind of give it credit for, because we looked at Singapore and we said, it's hot there. And the one thing we know about the Mercedes is that it struggles in the heat when the rear tyres are kind of being overworked. And, that does happen in Singapore. Traditionally, it's happened in Singapore. George actually himself, trying to explain it, because, I asked this to Toto, well, after the race, what changed? But why were you so quick? And he didn't really have a particularly convincing answer. I think he knew a lot more than what he was letting on. But George said something interesting, which was basically they've resurfaced some of the corners of Singapore since last year. The tyre overheating wasn't such a big issue. Of course, all the teams have made steps forward in trying to look after those rear tyres. It was the same compounds as the previous season. So there wasn't really as much kind of tyre sliding and overheating as you expect. And then because a lot of the corners are quite short in duration, you're not putting a lot of energy throughout the tyre, throughout the corner. Actually, the Mercedes wasn't overheating its tyres in the end, and it was just quite well suited to that track layout. So yeah, a reminder that just looking at single data points or single things about a racetrack is not enough. You have to have a all-encompassing view. But I don't think, if you'd asked Mercedes at the start of the weekend, do you think you're going to be in for what looked like an easy victory at the end of it? I don't think anyone would have said yes. So it was a surprise in that sense. And I think a lot of that is credit to George. He actually crashed in Friday practice. I think one of the first mistakes, and first time he's been in the barriers this season, which is impressive. But then he completely recovered from that. Put in a fantastic lap in qualifying. There was some suggestion that maybe Max would have been closer to him or faster than him had he not hit the dirty air of Lando Norris in the final few corners. But look, you got to get it done on the track at the time. And George did that. And then in the race, I think what became clear throughout it is that the Mercedes had enough pace just to keep a gap to Max. But there were times when Max was eating into it. But actually, probably the fastest car in the race, and this is why I stand by my prediction that you shamed me for earlier, is I think the fastest car in the race was the McLaren. It just couldn't put together that lap in qualifying. And so if you were to let all the cars run the 63 laps or whatever it is in isolation, I think the McLarens would have the fastest time. But once you get stuck behind another car, as Norris did with Max Verstappen, then you're just struggling to ever get past because it's so difficult to overtake in Singapore. Or actually, something that our stat of the week was wrong on last week, because it's just there's lots of overtaking. In reality, it's still very tough to overtake there. So yeah, I think there was a lot of interesting things going on there. Probably we should have known that it wasn't going to be as simple as it looks on paper, because Singapore rarely is. It often throws up surprise results, or the lead car doesn't do as well as it does at other circuits. So maybe we should have guessed that it would be a surprise result. But even then, I don't think many people would have pointed confidently at the Mercedes as the winning car.
No, definitely not. I think for all those reasons that you've outlined, and you joked about me shaming your predictions. We've just absolutely shamed the stat of the week there. So hopefully this week's one is is slightly better. But I think you're right. I think the conventional wisdom coming into the weekend, and we were all quite excited about it, weren't we? This was supposed to be kind of validation of the Max Verstappen outsider status in the championship. Remarkably, there's an incredible stat about Singapore. Of all the places where Max has won, he's got so many. This is the only place he hasn't won, and Antonio Giovinazzi has led more laps of a Singapore Grand Prix than Max Verstappen. I think it's 4 to Giovinazzi and 3 to Max Verstappen, which is quite remarkable. Really, when you just think about how long Max Verstappen has been the dominant force in Formula One, really remarkable. That's been such an Achilles heel for him. Obviously, the only Red Bull win in recent memory was when Perez beat Verstappen there in 2022, which was one of those random races that Perez just kind of became the streets king for a year and a half, maybe, if I'm being kind. I don't think I saw enough from Russell and Red Bull, from Verstappen and Red Bull there to think that he can be a title contender. But the great thing with Max is at 3 races now he's finished ahead of the McLarens, and we're seeing, as we mentioned earlier, we're seeing that fight get a bit more spicy out in front. I think that, I don't know if you agree with me on this, but it feels like there's at least one more clash between the McLaren drivers in the offing this season, in terms of whether it's a big one, whether it's another bang of wheels like we saw in Singapore. But they're racing all year. They've been so close together all season long. And if Max can just keep finishing ahead of the McLaren drivers, he doesn't have to be finishing 3 places, 2 places ahead of them. Just keep chipping away at that overall points gap. They're going to keep taking points out of each other. I think he still could maybe be a factor at the end of the season. I think a lot still needs to happen. I think there needs to be a big moment between the McLaren drivers. But again, the fact that Max is even in that conversation says a lot about what we think about him, and just about how well Red Bull have turned that around. And a quick shout out, I have to say, to Laurent Mekies, the Red Bull boss who replaced Horner, who has taken the most humble view on it as he can. He's been very, very precise in saying, I can take 0 credit for this, 0% credit. Max Verstappen and Helmut Marko have both said that's not true, that he should take some. But clearly a lot of things going right there as well. So Max Verstappen, in my opinion, is still very much in the title fight, but is very much the outsider. And I'd love to see him keep finishing ahead of the McLarens, because I think Lauren's right that every time he finishes ahead of both cars, we're going to get more excited about it, even if it's just a slight bit. Like if that comes down to 50-something points in Austin, then suddenly 40-something points in Mexico, maybe. It feels like it's just coming down and down and down. And McLaren are definitely worried about it. So I'm excited about that one. I don't know if you had anything to add on Max, but we can move straight on.
Yeah, no, I think it was the validation that we wanted on the Red Bull to speak to that point, because it is true that last time they loaded that car with high downforce was Zandvoort, and it was a long way off the McLarens. Wasn't quite as problematic as it had been earlier in the season, but then the time before that was Hungary, and it was absolutely nowhere. So clearly the development that they've pushed through, which actually included a minor upgrade to the front wing, just still chasing little gains. And Laurent Mekies has talked about this, how they looked at this year's car and they didn't want to just leave it the way it was. They did want to just learn every last little bit they could from it, because you never know what's going to be useful going forward as well, even if you can't directly take the parts and put them on next year's car because it's going to be so different. But there's still lessons and learnings to be had there. So that I think is very, very positive. But the one thing that Verstappen said after Baku is that if he is going to fight for this title, he needs to get everything absolutely 100%, and he needs McLaren to make mistakes. And I think that speaks to your point that we probably still do need to see the McLarens really drop some significant points, whether it be colliding with each other or whatever, for Max to get truly in this championship. But also, this is the thing, if Max had been able to pull out an absolutely amazing qualifying lap, and perhaps it was Lando Norris's dirty air that meant that he didn't, but if he'd been able to put that lap together, put it on pole, I think he would have won that race. Because I think, again, because the overtaking was so difficult on Sunday, I think he would have been able to keep Russell's car behind, who would have kept the McLarens at bay. And that would have been, then we were talking about, really big points differential between him and Oscar Piastri from winning a race to fourth place is 13 points. So that would have been big. So that's kind of what he needed. He needed to be absolutely perfect, absolutely on it, as he said he needed to be in Baku, and he wasn't quite there. But look, I'm not taking away from Max Verstappen's Singapore weekend, because I think it was still very impressive and very confidence-inspiring going forward. The other thing I'd like to say about Red Bull at the moment is how great it is to see them being so aggressive with every call, because they have zero to lose at the moment. Like, they may as well be aggressive with every little bit of last performance they can get out of the car. They may as well be aggressive with trying different setup directions, because what else have they got to lose? If it works, Max maybe does stand a chance at this title. If it doesn't, he's going to finish third anyway. And the two things which I really liked in Singapore was that he was the absolute last driver on the track for qualifying. They put him out right at the end. Complete contrast to Norris, who was only in Max's way or creating dirty air for Max because he'd gone so much earlier in the session for fear of a red flag, meaning that he wouldn't get a lap in. So there was like a real contrast in the way those two teams are approaching things like qualifying. And then the other one was when he just put soft tyres on the car for the start. He was on the dirty side of the grid. It was always going to be really difficult to pass Russell into the first corner. But the one chance he had, and again, that one chance to make that perfect weekend, was to whack soft tyres on it, deal with the strategy implications later and just get ahead of Russell in his first corner. Didn't pay off. But I just love that they're making those kind of calls, like super aggressive decisions to try and make this championship happen one way or another. But because they have nothing to lose, it's kind of easy to take that call. Whereas, as we talked about earlier, is the pressure building around McLaren and their drivers? Well, they certainly can't be as aggressive with various decisions like that, because the consequences of it going wrong, of course, are far greater.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And I think Max also gave a great quote, a great soundbite on the Saturday, as Max is prone to do, when he said about that Lando Norris moment. He said, "It will be remembered." I don't know how ominous that Lando Norris should feel that was. It reminded me of the character on Family Guy that says, "Pepperidge Farm remembers," that guy who pops up every so often. And I do wonder later in the year if he is in a position where he's fighting Lando for position. Obviously, both McLaren drivers can't, to that exact point, can't throw caution into the wind. They have to, by its very nature, especially Piastri, has to be a bit more cautious. Is there going to be a situation, we're coming to Austin last year and then we're going to Mexico, two places where Max and Lando had incredible fights last year that were both very controversial. Is that, a moment where Max gets his elbows out and says, well, I remember what happened in Singapore. Max has never really needed an excuse to race like that anyway. But I think that is a really fascinating part of this kind of dynamic as well, is that of all the people you want, I think, like chasing an almost impossible championship, Max is almost the perfect guy for that, because he's so damn entertaining to watch, and he does race like that all the time. So hopefully we do get him closer and closer. But I agree with what you said, Max, and the other great thing about Max as well is that obviously being that aggressive, you can't do that with every driver on the grid, right? If you're the Red Bull pit wall, you can't just say to Yuki Tsunoda, for example, we're just going to be super aggressive with you because he's struggling fundamentally to understand the car. You can't do that. So whenever you see teams doing that, it just shows such comprehensive and fundamental confidence and belief in that driver to basically to deliver with it.
Yeah, and imagine Max took great pleasure in keeping Lando Norris behind him.
Yeah. Did you see his Instagram thing where he put I forget the framing of that, but it's the Instagram frame, and it was him right at the bottom and it was Lando right at the top, and they were as far apart as they could be in that frame. And you can imagine when he put that up that there was a bit of a wry smile on his face, because like you said, McLaren probably did have the quicker car in pure pace at points in that race, and Lando just couldn't get close enough to him.
And also, I think dropping little quotes like that, it's so Max saying that, this will be remembered and all that kind of stuff. Because even if he just never acts on it, that might, and maybe it won't be, but that might just be in the back of Norris's mind when he's trying to pull off, like, a move as he tried in Singapore. He got alongside Max on one occasion. I wonder if the back of his mind was just like, Max very rarely gives any space anyway, but is he going to be even more aggressive this time because of what happened yesterday? So I just love that kind of every little detail where Max is covered, whether it be psychological, whether it be engineering, whether it be just taking every centimetre of the track. Every detail is covered by him. And I think that's why he's such a ruthless and brilliant competitor.
Absolutely. Quick one on ruthless and unbelievably quick competitors who are also great for a soundbite. Fernando Alonso with two of the best radio messages of the season. First of all, I think he was told he had 34 laps left, and he said, if you keep talking to me, to his race engineer, I'm going to turn off the radio, which got a big chuckle in the Singapore Media Centre. An even bigger one came later. And I'm going to quickly put you on the spot about what this meant later, because we were discussing it in the press room afterwards. He had a great fight, I thought, with Isaac Hadjar after fantastic racing from both of them, very aggressive. Both of them kind of not giving the other just enough to kind of race fairly, but really on that line. And then afterwards, we heard him say, trophy for the hero of the race there, which I don't know about you, Lawrence. We were sat together. To us in that media centre, I thought Fernando Alonso was crowning himself the hero of the race. I thought he was giving himself the trophy of the race. Lo and behold, when we listened to the transcripts back from some of the media sessions that we had missed, just because of how busy it gets in the evening, Isaac Hadjar had it put to him, Fernando Alonso sarcastically called you the hero of the race and said, you had the trophy for the hero of the race, which I hadn't clocked that. Now, it was quite disappointing for me because I was writing a piece that I just basically led on that, as I showed you at the time, which was self-proclaimed hero of the race. Fernando Alonso has gained another place because Lewis Hamilton has a penalty, had to delete that great lead and just write it in a very, very boring way. Do you think, having kind of looked at that since, is he talking about Isaac Hadjar or is he talking about himself? Because Fernando Alonso is prone to kind of proclaiming himself to have had the best race of all time, or there was a spell, I don't know if you remember, with McLaren where he would say, like, I drove like an elephant today, I drove like a lion, I drove like a tiger. And he'd said it so much that at one point in the season he said, I drove like all the animals in the zoo today. And that basically, he was in on his own joke about kind of how he talks about himself. Do you still think he was talking about Hadjar, or do you think that was actually a self-proclaiming of him as the hero of the race? Because I love it if it was that.
Yeah, I think there was a quote afterwards from Alonso as well that kind of indicated, I can't remember exactly what he said, but it kind of indicated that it was aimed at Hadjar. I don't honestly know. But no. I mean,
it's a very minute point. I don't want to put you on the spot about it.
No,
fully, but just such a good soundbite.
We didn't have the opportunity to ask him that question directly, but yeah, it sounded like he was saying it sarcastically towards Hadjar. But I mean, either way, that race needed some entertainment, and I think Hadjar's defense and Alonso's attack was fascinating to watch. I mean, I wish we could get more racing like that throughout a Singapore Grand Prix. I mean, I think it was partly due to the fact that Hadjar was nursing an engine issue and therefore probably didn't quite have the straight line speed that he needed to keep Alonso at bay. And maybe Alonso was aware of that, and that was why he felt, that Hadjar was maybe kind of overdriving a bit. He's going to lose the position anyway, and therefore it was kind of ironic hero of the race. I don't know. But either way, provided entertainment, and that's what Fernando Alonso seems to do week in, week out.
Yeah, and I love seeing the old and the new generation. It's harsh to call Alonso, but present and the new fighting like that as well. Because I know that Alonso seemed quite upset, didn't he, with Hadjar about kind of how aggressive he was. But fantastic to see that, and I think Hadjar's been so impressive this season. To see him fighting like that with Fernando, fantastic to see. And yeah, I agree with you, and especially in a race like Singapore, where, let's face it, if the Piastri Norris thing hadn't happened at the start, and we hadn't had all those radio messages, there was not a lot in that race to talk about. And one of the reasons why there wasn't a lot to talk about focused around another Spaniard. Now, I have to admit, I completely missed, really, in the end of that race, the fact that Carlos Sainz was on an absolute tear through the field. And I think that a lot of people watching that race would have missed it as well, because it was completely missed off of the broadcast. And Carlos Sainz, we were talking about Fernando Alonso giving great quotes. Carlos Sainz was speaking to Spanish radio this week. I'm not going to read his whole quote out, but we've run this today on ESPN.com. It seems to have picked up quite a bit of traction since he said it. But he was asked about the fact that, so he, I believe, rose at the end of the race from about 16th to 10th. He put some soft tyres on at the end of the race, carved through the field. Sainz it looks like a new man, doesn't he? Since the Baku weekend and then Singapore, absolutely fantastic given what the narrative of his season was before that. He was asked about not being shown at all. I mean, you barely saw it happening at the time. Now, here's what he said, Lawrence, and I won't read the whole thing. It's a very long quote, but the bits that stood out to me were, and he's referring specifically to overtakes not being shown and crowd shots and garage shots being shown instead. And he said, yes, it's becoming a bit of a trend, which must have worked for them at one time when people found it interesting to see our girlfriends, to see famous people on television and their reactions. And he said, I understand that if there's an overtake or a very tense moment in the race, it's understandable that the production team might want to show a reaction shot. But only, and this is where he's saying he thinks it should be done, only if the competition is respected and you're always showing the important moments of the race. He said, last weekend they didn't show any of my 4 or 5 overtakes I did, nor did they show Fernando's pursuit of Lewis. Obviously, that went right to the finish line and was actually settled in the steward's room afterwards. He added this at the end. He said, they missed a lot of things. He said, that's fine. All of that's fine, but just don't lose the main sight of the main thing, which for me, they even exaggerate a little bit by showing the celebrities and the girlfriends. Now, Lawrence, I said I wasn't going to read that whole quote, and then I basically just did read the whole quote, bar a few words. But as I read it, I realized it's a very strong statement against the broadcast. Now, for people listening to this, wondering, well, which broadcasting team is he having a go at there? He's kind of having a go at the whole thing, because what happens is if you're watching in the UK, you're watching on Sky, ESPN in the US takes the Sky coverage, but there are lots of different broadcasters around the world that take Formula One. All of them have the say in what they do around the coverage. So the punditry stuff you see, the interviews that they can do, when they broadcast them, how they broadcast them, but the sessions that you see, whether it's practice, whether it's qualifying, or whether it's the race, all of that is done by a singular world feed that is controlled by Formula One. And that has been lampooned, hasn't it, in the past? I remember there were times when they would show replays of a driver kind of going over the chicane. There was a Lance Stroll meme that I kept seeing when they'd pan away and it would just go straight to the Lance Stroll from a few years ago. But it does seem like there has become this over-reliance and this over-obsession, I would say, with exactly those two things he said. Celebrities, there's so many at Formula One races now, but also the girlfriends of these drivers. And, I don't think in football games or in NFL games that is the norm. Obviously, it's become a big thing in the NFL that Taylor Swift has shown so much. I think that's quite a rare example of a global superstar dating an active superstar as well in Travis Kelce at the Chiefs. Do you think there's something to this, Lawrence? Has the broadcast become a little bit too obsessed with the reactions and the people over the racing itself? This is probably an extreme example where we miss so much of it, but I think the fact that we're even talking about it suggests that there is at least some problem with it, right?
Yeah, but I think there's two different things going on here. The reason that we didn't see Sainz's move towards the end and the reason we didn't see Alonso closing down Lewis was because they were focusing on Norris and Max. And so that's not really surprising. Those two are fighting for the championship. That was also for second place. Like, I wish there was a way where you could show more, or they sometimes do a separate box in the standings column where you see that driver and what they're doing at that moment on board. I think that stuff is really helpful. We only had that quite recently in F1, but if you're telling a narrative of a race and you spend the whole race kind of building up this Norris v Verstappen battle for second place, and it's got implications in the championship, and then you cut to Alonso, closing a 20-second gap to a 0.4-second gap on the final lap, and you miss the Norris overtake on Verstappen, then there's going to be understandable complaints as well. So I think that's one issue whereby you just simply cannot show everything at the same time. It's not like an NFL game. It's not a single ball and then all the players around. It's like multiple. It's like 22 or 20 different balls all being played at once around a 5-kilometer circuit, so it's just simply not possible to show everything all at once. I think it's a shame when stuff doesn't get replayed as well as it should. But the problem with the end of the race is that if all the action happens then, you then go to the podium, you want to see the emotions of the drivers as they get out, you want to hear the team radio from them. There's often not enough time to clip the moves from elsewhere into it, and then, as you say, the broadcasters, all the different broadcasters, then go off on their own different ways, and so things do get lost. And look, that's a shame, but it's kind of one of those things. It's there's very little you can do about it. And And in fact, with the advance of technology, if you're a massive Carlos Sainz fan or a massive Fernando Alonso fan or Lewis fan, you can actually watch on board with your driver. You know, you have to pay a certain subscription, I should imagine, but you can watch on board with your driver as they go around and do their thing. So that's one thing. Then there's this girlfriend celebrity issue that, I do get. But also, there were times during that race when it was tediously boring. There was nothing happening. You know, like, yes, if you were focusing on one single driver, you might start to see, Sainz is going really long. I wonder if he's going to put the soft tyres on. I wonder if that's going to... But unless you are purely focusing on Sainz's race for the whole thing, and you're ignoring all the battles that are happening elsewhere, possibly the ones which are more important for the championship, it's quite hard to then just feed into that narrative and, watch Sainz kind of all of a sudden putting in quick laps and kind of then explain that he's closing on these other drivers, because you are telling a story with usually what's going on at the front. And then you have the thing of, but for my personal taste, and, this really doesn't have any, because everyone will have a different opinion. Yeah, I think it's a little bit overplayed. Like, I don't think we need to see it so much. I think there's other stuff that's more important. But that's my personal taste as a Formula One fan. There'll be people who love it. There'll be people who have watched Drive to Survive and have kind of, or followed drivers on Instagram, and they've really bought into the relationships between these drivers and their girlfriends, a lot of which is out on social media. And then they'll probably get a kick out of seeing them in the garage and the tension that goes with it. And occasionally, I think it really can add to it. If a move happens and then they cut to a replay of what was going in the garage, the faces of the mechanics, of the team, of the people that we kind of get little glimpses of along the human side of it, because of course when the driver's in the car, they're wearing a helmet, you can't see their human emotions, then that does add something to it. I think that is important in sport. So I think it's two slightly different issues going on that Sainz was kind of conflating into one. And and there, it all comes down to personal taste and what you want. But more than ever in Formula One, you can satisfy your personal taste by following a single driver on a lot of subscription services. I know not everyone has them, but you can.
Yeah, the people at F1 TV will be very happy with you saying that, Lawrence, because that was a good pitch for why to. But I think you're right. That is true now, and I think the point you made about there being one ball in a lot of sports versus this is so right. I mean, even if you watch, we were talking about the Ryder Cup. Even that, sometimes struggles keeping up with the action because there's so much going on, especially towards the end. They obviously get an easier go of it because it's a very easy. Your point about narratives is exactly perfect, because at the Ryder Cup there's a lot going on, but everything has a narrative. It's like if this guy sinks this ball, they go one up, or they level the time. It's all very easy to explain. A Formula One race, if you haven't seen Sainz or race and suddenly you're like, well, hang on, when did he pit? What tires does he have on, etc. It is a tough job. I think the one thing I'd say on that though, and I'd love to know what you think on this with broadcasting in Formula One. In the Singapore race, you're right, they were following Lando and Max quite a lot. There's a lot of places on a circuit like Singapore where there's not going to be an overtake. And I wonder if those moments are where the coverage can kind of be like, okay, look, there's X, Y, Z we have to follow from this point through to the end here, because this is the best point. If you're doing Baku, for example, if you've got a driver following the other, it's like we have to make sure we see these guys following all the way down the main straight up to turn one, because that's probably where they're going to get them. Obviously, you then run the risk of missing out. Oh, Max has just clipped the wall randomly in the lap, or Lando has, whatever. So there is an argument against that as well. But it is a tough thing. It's a really, really tough thing. I actually spoke to Formula One about this, and they said exactly that. They also had the fact of, let's not forget that by finishing where they finished, McLaren wrapped up the Constructors' Championship as well. They had George Russell winning the race. They had, Piastri right at the end, where is he in relation to everything? A lot of different narratives. Do you tell the narrative of the race winner? Do you tell the narrative of the title race and the drivers? Do you tell the narrative of the constructors? Do you tell the narrative of Lewis Hamilton having brake issues and Fernando catching him at the end? All those points are kind of you could probably argue each of them individually, maybe with different levels of success. But yeah, I think that part of it to me isn't an issue. I think what he has touched on is there has seemed to become an obsession with immediate reactions to stuff. I think the point you made is very good about you want to see the human faces of stuff. But what I wish they would stop doing in Formula One is an overtake happens and they immediately pan to the garage. I think it's that immediate pan to the garage that is the problem. If you score a goal in a soccer match or you score a touchdown, that's the moment. You watch the celebration. The celebration is part of the touchdown. If you've watched Formula One for a while, you know that if a driver overtakes another into turn one, that's half the move done. You've got to you might have compromised your exit coming out of there. You might have used all your tyres on the lap before. The other guy might have actually kind of played a bit of cat and mouse with you and said, well, actually, I'm going to let you get past here and I'm going to pass you at the next corner. Going straight then to a girlfriend or to a celebrity or to even to a team boss or whatever it is, or the crowd, those crowd shots they do all the time. I think sometimes those could be rolled back a little bit, maybe show them, afterwards, after the fact a little bit. But there are times when that has led to stuff being missed. I don't think it was the case in Singapore. But yeah, it does seem like a very difficult job to do. And yeah, I think you've convinced me that I need to get an F1 TV subscription, because that does seem to be the best way to follow it. And also now as well, I think that we're so lucky. If you think about when we were watching Formula One as kids, you literally were only able to watch what they showed you on TV. You didn't have Twitter to go to afterwards. You didn't really have YouTube to go to and see, a cut of the best highlights of the race or whatever. You literally were shown what you saw. And I think that was probably when it was a bigger issue. Now, so much goes on. And I think actually a lot of fans now discover great moments like Sainz cutting through the field after the race, because you just can't focus on that the whole time. So I'd agree with you. I think there's something to what he said. I think it's harsh to fully come down on Formula One for that. Very, very difficult thing to do. And it is one of the most unique sports in the world to do that. I mean, I saw somebody saying in the Indy 500, they always manage to show stuff. The Indy 500 is on one giant oval and everyone's just chasing the lead car, So in terms of, to that point about the narratives, actually much easier to follow it. It's like this guy's one lap up, but he's pitted one time less than everyone else. Very easy story to tell. You can tell that with, with the banner, with the footage. So it is a tough sport to do. And yeah, I wonder if it will get any better. I wonder, Lawrence, I'm going to predict something here to you. I think either Carlos Sainz or definitely Fernando Alonso will say it's not about celebrities. It's not about girlfriends. It's not about any of that stuff. It's because Fernando is being chased by Lewis Hamilton, and he will claim that the F1 broadcast didn't want to show that, and it involved Lando. I think Fernando will go down the British bias route of that. I don't really agree with that so much, but I'm making that prediction now, and and if I get it right, then it won't matter in our predictions table, but I can at least be smug about it afterwards, because it wasn't lost on me that the two guys that kind of missed out on that footage were two Spanish guys who were fantastic drivers and gave absolutely everything they could to make that race entertaining. But I thought that their nationality was quite unfortunate in terms of that whole narrative around that, because I don't think that is the reason why. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's people listening to this being like, you've just missed the point that, that they're thinking. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that would be on brand for Fernando to make that
Yeah, it would.
I mean, he is very close to the sport. I think usually he makes that accusation towards the FIA. I think I'm right saying
that's it. He does, and I just want to clarify. I'm not having a go at Fernando Alonso there, but
yeah,
we will massively love and respect Fernando as what he's done for the sport, but it does seem to be his default for a lot of these things. So I do wonder if that will be where he goes. But you're right; it is usually at the FIA. Maybe it's not so much at F1.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to, put words in either of their mouths, but I think it is. It's just that thing of, are you really going to show Fernando Alonso closing in on Lewis when George has just crossed the line and has won the championship, and McLaren have just won the Constructors' Championship? Like, you just can't. It can't all be shown at once. But I also go back to your earlier point where you said about them immediately cutting away after an overtake. That I completely agree with, because that is frustrating quite often, especially when, even if the overtake is done, but you're not 100% sure. The other driver could still outbrake them. Let's watch the whole thing play out. And then, if they have some great footage of the team celebrating, just play it delayed. Give it a 1-second delay. It doesn't really matter. It still tells the story, right?
And I think one thing, sorry, we didn't actually plan to talk about this, but I think it's quite interesting. One thing that's quite interesting with F1 broadcasts as well is there seems to be this moment of, in the F1 broadcaster's mind, and I'm not having a go at the particular person because it's a whole policy, but laps kind of 3 to 6 don't really exist in a Formula One race if you watch it live, because that's when they show back to back the start, the overtakes. Here's an onboard with a guy who started 10th. Here's an onboard with a guy that started 13th. Here's the lead. They'll do that giant cluster of stuff at the beginning, and maybe it speaks to how uneventful Formula One races are at the very beginning of stints. But I always feel like at that point, that's when you're really invested in what's happened at the beginning. This guy's lost a position here. This person's done this. And then you just have like a big solid chunk of replays. Maybe there's no better way to do that. But that, to me as well, always feels like a moment where it's like, maybe these could be spread out a bit more. Maybe we don't need to see the guy who started in 18th battling someone through? Maybe we do. I mean, maybe that is the only time to see it. So as frustrating as that is, I think it does speak to the point you made about there's no real perfect way to shine a light on everything unless you just take a giant chunk out of the race and say, well, we're going to show it now. But that's always been something I always laugh to myself. It's literally like, it's always like the beginning of lap 3 or lap 4. It's like, here we go. Here's the two lap montage where we have that. And there probably is no better place to do that than there. But just a shame that sometimes I feel like it takes some of the tension and drama out of the race you're watching.
Yeah, I think F1 do actually refer to it as a lap 4 replay, or at least people kind of maybe not officially, but like I've heard that said before. The lap 4 replay is, it's coming up.
Yeah, right. That's interesting. I hadn't heard that.
By lap 4, you get the replay of the start. But I think that is also, I've actually done a tour of the broadcasting setup of F1 that's in Biggin Hill in outside London, and it's hugely impressive. And the job they do actually is quite remarkable, and the balls they're juggling is something else. But I think statistically that is the best time to show it, because like you say, you need to, for a lot of people, they'll be like, wait, what happened to Norris in that corner? Like, how did he get on the inside of Oscar? I need to see that again because I really want to figure out how that happened. So you have that urgency to see how something played out. But equally, by lap 4, usually the racing is statistically, I think, settled down a bit. So you're less likely to get an overtake or a move on that lap. And then, they sometimes do cut out a bit if they need to. But like I said, no perfect way of doing it. I actually think they do a pretty good job. There's some things that annoy me slightly, but everyone's different. And like I said earlier, there'll be some people that love the human reaction to it all, I imagine.
Yeah. Well, keep the girlfriend shots coming for Laurence Edmondson. That's what I'm hearing.
Hey.
No, that's me putting words in your mouth there, mate. Sorry, I'm being intentionally cheeky.
Putting words in both.
This is the power of being the host that I quite enjoy. I don't know how Nicole doesn't let it go to her head. Quick one, finally. As something that did come up in the weekend, we won't dwell on this for too long because it is quite a weird story. Christian Horner's name came up again. Andy Cowell, CEO at Aston Martin, said Horner's been calling around every team. It does seem like he's been calling a few teams. We know there's a meeting with a representative of Gene Haas that very quickly was made clear to Horner that there isn't a way back into Formula One with that team. For people that are listening, wondering, wait, is he coming back as team boss? Sounds like behind the scenes he's putting together an investment team, a team of different businessmen and different sponsors and different people with lots and lots of money to try and come back with a significant stake in a team to try and buy not just a position back on the grid, but let's be honest, buy some power and some influence back on the grid and be in a situation where he can't get sacked by shareholders as he was at Red Bull. I'll quickly put you on the spot, Laurence, about this. We did a piece on this at the weekend about where we think he's going to go. What is the best option or the most likely option for a guy like Christian Horner, and why is it that team?
I think of the existing teams, Alpine is probably the best option based on what we've heard. It seems like the 3 clear ones that had potential were Haas, Aston Martin, and Alpine. And Alpine is the one that's given the least convincing no. They've all said no, he's not getting immediately involved, but that was the least convincing one. And just that team, while Renault officially seem to want to hold on to it, that's what they've said in the media, they're certainly not shy of letting stakes in it go in return for investment. So that could be one way in. The other way is whether enough money and investors and things can be put in place to set up his own project going into Formula One, a new team going in, a 12th team. There is space on the grid for a 12th team, but that would be a much longer term project and would go through all the battles that Cadillac went through to get onto the grid next year. And probably, unless they get some really convincing investors or a really big brand name behind them, you wonder whether it would pass the test that you need to get on the grid based on what we saw with Cadillac. So I would say Alpine still seems like the most likely one, but this sport can surprise you in some pretty big ways. I mean, I find it interesting that Andy Cowell, a guy who's not usually that prone to kind of like saying a huge amount in the media, actually, he's very straight and he gives very, detailed answers on questions, but he doesn't tend to put out sound bites. And all of a sudden he's like, yeah, Christian's rung around all the teams. And I did wonder whether that was a case that maybe, either it's two things. It's either one, he's so confident that his position isn't under threat that he's happy to put that out there and kind of, throw a bit of shade Christian's way. Or perhaps, in the back of his mind, he's thinking, well, what if Laurence does, change his mind about Christian? He's just trying to get a step up there. So that's based on the little bits that we know, but I don't know. Have you got any more information?
No, I think you hit it nail on the head. Yeah, it did strike me as me think that the team boss doth protest too much, didn't it? It did feel a bit like he was kind of outwardly being like, no, there's nothing to this, nothing to this at all. Like, there's no need for you guys to talk about it. I think Aston would be fascinating. You made a great point in the piece that we co-wrote together at the weekend. The one obvious thing with Aston Martin is if they have a competitive car, number one on Lawrence Stroll's list is going to go after Max Verstappen, surely. You want to pair the best driver of this current generation with the best car of this new generation. There's no way Jos Verstappen, after finally getting rid of Christian Horner, is going to say, yeah, no, we're actually happy to come back and join in some way, unless Horner's maybe sidelined in some way. But in business, a lot of people make these concessions, don't they? When there's a lot of money at play, when it is beneficial. So I'm with you. Aston Martin doesn't seem like a complete impossibility. The one I think is fascinating is Haas. I'm stunned that Gene Haas just kind of dismissed Horner out of hand. That's a team that really hasn't done a huge amount in Formula One. When you really look at it, they've been the smallest team in the sport for a long time. They've got a factory that's falling down. They just built a new motorhome that's 2 stories. Apparently now they're going to build another story on top of that just because they've realized it's not big enough. So it's a team, isn't it, that has become kind of synonymous with those quite difficult title partnerships. Rich Energy, then the Uralkali money that had to go after the Russian invasion. MoneyGram is ending at the end of this year. It just feels like a team that maybe needs some outside investment from outside. And the fact that Gene Haas has kind of dismissed that, maybe he's doing that to up the price. Maybe he's doing that to say, well, look, if you really want it, come and table me something quite amazing. But all the conversations that we've had, Lawrence, as far as I'm aware from your side as well, has been that Gene Haas very stubbornly is just like, I don't want to do anything with this team. So that's an interesting one. I think Alpine is the clearly like front runner out there, just in terms of the leaders. The other thing as well is fascinating with Haas saying no is the leadership and the pedigree that Horner can bring with him. Haas need that. Haas need like a guy that can come in and say, well, I've built from the ground up. I helped build a championship winning team. So I think that's very interesting, but one that we'll keep our eyes on for people that aren't aware and wondering why we're talking specifically about Horner now and why he's only just started calling team bosses. He, a week before Singapore, reached an agreement with Red Bull about 100 million British pounds. Or no, sorry, it was $100 million that we reported. It's about 80 million pounds. There's varying reports out there, but all you need to know is that he made a significant amount of money on that payoff, and the other part of that, taking the payoff, has freed him up to come back as early as I think about May or June next year. So very much something that he wants to do as soon as he's able to do that and get his feet back in. So we'll be keeping tabs on Christian Horner and all things with him and his potential comeback to Formula One. Lawrence, thanks very much, mate, for joining. It's been great, and as I've said before in these episodes before, don't worry, you'll be back in Nicole's very capable hands next week. Every time I do this, I get a newfound respect for Nicole and the job she's able to do hosting, because it is very difficult. I suddenly start forgetting how to read the rundown that I have on one half of my screen. So, Lawrence, great to see you, mate, and we'll be back in Austin, which I know for both of us is a race very close to both of our hearts. Fantastic race, fantastic weekend, big one for ESPN, and a great one in terms of the championship, because I think it's going to be another fascinating weekend. So thanks for listening or for watching if you're doing that. And remember, please do leave us a comment and hit that like button. And don't forget to subscribe to ESPN F1 for more F1 content. If you're listening, please do hit us with a 5-star review if you've enjoyed what you've watched or you've listened to today. So it makes a really, really big difference to everything we do going forward. Unlapped is presented by Oracle. And right now, Oracle is offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move over to OCI. See if your company qualifies at oracle.com/unlapped.